This series is called Mongrel Nation, and in it we will celebrate over 2,000 years of English history, waves of invasion, centuries of immigration, and floods of foreign ideas that have come into our land to make us who we are, not despite foreigners, but because of them.
From the English language to our currency, from the Houses of Parliament to the Sunday roast, from the aristocracy to St. George and his flag, most things we think of as quintessentially English actually come from abroad. The first people to really settle in England were the Celts. They arrived in about 2500 BC, around lunchtime. England was all theirs until the 1st century AD, and they could be defined as the true original English. But few remnants of their culture have survived today. We don't eat their food, speak their language, or worship their gods. Even the people have changed. Today, more than 95% of the English have foreign ancestry. No other major European nation has as dynamic and vibrant a mix of foreign genes. The story of this mongrel nation is a rich and surprising one that began just over 2,000 years ago with the arrival of the Romans.
Now, the Romans invaded in the 1st century AD, and they were the first of 4 different sets of invaders. First you had the Romans, they all came in, and then they went away again. And then you had the Angles and the Saxons, they came in, they stayed. And then there was the Norwegians and the Danes, they came in, they stayed. And then there were the French, who we call the Normans. And they all brought with them a different way of living, which affected England at the time and has stayed with us in England in different ways up to the present day. The Romans invaded 43 AD, Emperor Claudius sent his armies in, and they didn't just bring death with them, they brought a whole new way of life.
The Romans were a lean, mean imperial machine. They controlled most of the known world, and when they invaded, England became the farthest outpost of an empire that stretched from Northumbria to North Africa and all around the Mediterranean.
There would also have been, besides the legions, which numbered about 5,000, 6,000 men each, there would have been a large number of so-called auxiliary troops, and would have supplied the cavalry and specialist troops like that.
But the England the Romans invaded was a place devoid of anything we'd recognize as English. Most Celts didn't even have currency. Without coins, many people relied on a system known as barter. They had to buy and sell things not by exchanging money, but by exchanging possessions.
So it's lunchtime, you're a Celt, and you've got no money, because it doesn't exist. So how do you get your lunch? You have to do barter. You have to barter for things. You have to find what you've got and see if you can swap it for your food. Bacon roll.
In a bun?
In a bun, please.
Yeah.
But I haven't got any money.
Right.
So I can barter with you. I've got stuff in my bag that maybe, you know, today's newspaper.
No, not really, thank you.
Well, if I put it with a diary, because then you can keep dates.
No, I'll tell you what, you get me some onions, because I'm virtually out of onions.
All right.
If you can get some onions for me...
All right, I'll try and do that.
I'll do you a swap.
Okay,
some onions for bacon
I'll go
roll.
and see if I can swap some of this with Onion Man. Okay,
Okay.
I'll be back. I want to get some onions.
Yeah.
But I haven't got any money. Look, I've got a lot of stuff in my bag. Is there...
Yeah, you've been shoplifting again, haven't you? I've seen your type
No, I
up here
haven't. No.
before.
Is there anything in here that you'd like? One of these things where you keep your dates and your diaries. Some water. I've got some water.
No.
What do you need?
Socks is what I'm after.
All right, I'll come back. I'm trying to get some socks. I've got no money. I've got a book on the film industry in the 60s and 70s. Really quite.
I could do with a new frying pan.
That's a pretty good swap, actually, for socks. They might be bloody good socks.
They are, they're excellent.
It's a frying pan. Water plus a file of fags. You want the book?
Yeah, this one here.
I can go for this baby.
By all means, have that baby. I've got a good deal on that, I think.
Right, I've been to 4 stalls and ended up with a frying pan. So now I've got to go back up the chain to get a bacon roll.
Frying pan.
Fry pan.
Socks of my choice.
I would take those, they're the warmest ones.
Oh, yes, very nice.
Thermals, are they thermals? Yeah, I wanted thermals.
Very good. Keep you warm.
Yeah, and what did you want?
Onion.
I've sold out now, mate.
No, you've got some here.
Oh, look, I've just seen some over there. Yeah, already.
Bloody
You're a
hell.
good man. Can you manage that?
Yeah, fine. I've got onions. I've got more onions than I've expected.
Oh, right.
So this barter system, 4 different things like this, swap and come back with onions just to get a bacon roll. And it takes forever. It takes too long.
There we go, 1 bacon roll as promised.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Oh, so that took me about half an hour. With currency, you'd get that in 30 seconds. A lot quicker.
Which is why a common coinage was one of the most important things the Romans introduced. But it wasn't any old currency. It came to be seen as a key symbol of England and Englishness.
Now we know that the Romans brought with them roads, aqueducts, freshwater system, wine, public health, whatever it was, all that stuff that John Cleese covered in Life of Brian. But they also brought with them something else, something that we feel is quintessentially English, that we feel defines us and makes us different from the rest of the world. Our currency.
You'd never know it's foreign from the way we talk about it.
I like it that it's English, it's got the Queen on it, it's part of our culture and what makes us England.
If the pound itself did not exist, Englishness, whether it's cricket, warm beer and things like this, would eventually disappear.
It's very important, I think, that we keep our national heritage, which is our pound, the pound sterling.
But clearly, as it was imported by the Roman Italians, the pound isn't English at all. The Roman system was based on a big lump of metal known as a libra pondo, as was our system that copied it.
So, David, tell me, what is a libra pondo?
Well, a libra pondo, libra is basically a translation meaning a scale or weight, and the libra pondo is just a certain a weight of gold. It was the unit by which all of Rome's coinage was actually calculated.
And would someone back in Roman times, would they have carried that in off to buy something in the shops? Or?
No, very unlikely, unless they were going to sort of hit the guy around the head with it and run off with something, because it's a large weight.
And it splits down into one of these smaller
coinage. Yeah, the libra is worth 40 of the gold coins. You would get 40 gold aurei to 1 libra pondo, and that's a very simple transaction because 40 of those would weigh the same.
Right. And would people bite it? I've seen, in films.
They're not biting them because I guess their teeth probably won't last it, but you do occasionally see marks and nicks where they've actually cut into the metal to check that it's a pure silver coin.
But the Romans brought this sort of mass system in, and why did they need it? Why didn't they just do barter like some of the tribes in England were doing?
Pretty much because the economy and civilization of Rome had got to a point where it needed to be using a system of exchange more complicated than that, which made it easier to actually exchange goods. It's not, as you know, very easy to go out and actually buy something using a random object. It's got to be something that people are willing to accept in exchange.
Currency based on the libra pondo was used across the empire, not just in England, though it's really left its mark here. So the libra pondo, we get the big L, that is the pound, we get that comes off that?
That's right, yes.
And the pondo is pound, has become pound.
That's right.
Is the word pound.
Yes. In the later period, a lot of the coins that are being minted across the empire actually have letters on them showing where they've been made. Coins circulating here in St Albans, which were made in Yugoslavia. We've got coins that were made in Rome.
So you could have bought something in Colchester, and you could get the change from that, and you could nip down to someone like Jerusalem and buy something else with that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So like a universal currency, which bizarrely Europe is only now just heading towards. So it is ironic when people say they want to keep the pound and don't want the euro. The money they're defending is a Roman-Italian invention and was in fact the first European single currency. But the pound wasn't the only thing the Romans invented that we now think of as English.
When the Romans came to Britain, they naturally brought their way of living with them. And this would have included things like clothing, food, building techniques, language, law, you name it. I think that many people in Roman Britain, many of the Britons, would have really become indistinguishable from the Romans. They would have dressed the same way, they would have spoken Latin, they would have gone to the baths, they would have eaten the same sort of food, they would have reclined at the dining table, and they would also, in the fullness of time, we know that many of them will have become actual Roman citizens. So they will have thought of themselves as true Romans.
Roman imports also turn up in other unlikely English places.
If it wasn't for the Romans or the Italians, our Sunday lunch would look like this. Yummy. It's kind of like, you know porridge, but less. Sally.
Hi there.
I wanted a traditional English lunch, and this is what I got. What the hell is this?
It's called pottage. Oats or barley, it could be cracked wheat. We've got turnip in there, we've got onion in there.
Right.
This is Iron Age culture before the Romans came. And there's probably half a dozen families living in this one roundhouse, and they eat from a communal pot.
And they would have this all the time? When they ever have custard or, but we've got blancmange for afters, no?
Because they're cooking with wood over an open fire, they can't be subtle with food. It is about sustenance, it's about surviving.
Just using ingredients and techniques that the Romans introduced to England, Sally is making a Roman-style lunch. Compared to the way the Celts did things, the Romans had very sophisticated cooking techniques.
This is basically what the Romans would be cooking on, a griddle over charcoal.
So, did the Romans used to do barbecues?
Yes, except that they wouldn't actually put food directly onto the griddle, they'd put a pan or a frying pan on that.
But they never did that stupid man thing of getting paraffin and chucking it over.
No.
They're putting on a Hawaiian shirt.
The Romans brought us grilling, frying, sauce making, and even introduced ovens, which meant we could roast things.
We're serving the equivalent of a Roman chicken, and we're going to finish these off.
They bought much more than just parsnips and introduced a vast range of new ingredients.
The Romans, they introduced about 4 or 5 different types of cabbage. Same with strawberries, apples, plums, and cherries, thyme, parsley, coriander. All these herbs were introduced by the Romans and became popular. Right, now we're going to add to our gravy 2 spices. One is pepper, and one is something called Izzard. Have you ever heard of it?
Nope.
It apparently was an aphrodisiac. It's almost like rotten garlic, rotten onions.
Yes. I thought there was a bit of rotten in there. I wasn't going to say because
No, it's perfectly acceptable.
It smells like a wonderful aphrodisiac plus socks.
Well, they brought all these things in because the army was there. Created the trade route.
And army marches on its stomach.
We are actually ready to do our gravy, our Roman gravy.
And so gravy is another thing that...
It's the flavour from the meat added to other flavourings. Most definitely Roman.
This gravy is 1,000,000 miles away from an OXO cube. It's got honey, pepper, vinegar, wine and anchovy in it.
Quite a collection of tastes. It's kind of what we would go in now and order every Sunday, which is very, very staple English, and it just didn't exist before. These guys came in, murdered half of us, but left off their food. And that was nice. It's tangy, I would say. And somewhat unusual for me, but pleasant.
Enjoying the pleasure of food was introduced for the first time to Britain, and I think it's the one thing that's never gone. It's the inheritance the Romans left.
At the start of the 5th century, the Roman army began to gradually withdraw from England because their troops were needed to defend the heart of the empire against barbarian attacks. In 410 AD, some citizens wrote a desperate letter to the Roman Emperor Honorius, begging for more troops and protection. But Honorius had no troops to send, and England was effectively abandoned.
So, it's 410 AD. And what do the Romans do? They just zoom out of England because, oh, sorry, I left the oven on or something back in Rome. So they're out of it, and 410 AD, England's just open for invasion. 5 tribes are there going, oh, I think I'll have a bit of England, and they come steaming in. And these main tribes are called the Geats and the Jutes and the Angles and the Frisians and the Saxons, generally known as the Anglo-Saxons, but I prefer to call them the gangly, frangly-jangly Saxons. They're from about up here down to about here, and then they steam across here, and they end up in England in the north, sort of Humberside area, all the way down to Kent in the south of England. By 600 AD, half of England is under their rule. Now, these tribes, the Anglo-Saxons, or the Jangly Saxons, or whatever name we call them, this disguises the fact that they really are German tribes, or Germanic tribes. And these Germans really leave their mark on England. They give us one thing that above all we think of as being the epitome of being English, and that is the English language itself.
Which means that as the Anglo-Saxons started it, English is really a kind of German. Before the tribes invaded, we spoke Celtic dialects, known as Brittonic languages. Then the Anglo-Saxon tribes arrived speaking Germanic dialects. These gradually combined and became our first national language. This language is called Anglo-Saxon, or Old English. It is the core of the language we speak today. We use its pronunciation, word order, and vocabulary in every modern English sentence.
Essentially, the core of modern English vocabulary is directly descended from Old English. 30, 40, and even more % of modern English vocabulary is effectively Old English.
30, 40%. Is this in the certain areas particularly, more than others, or?
All of the common things were verbs of action like to tread, tredan, Old English, to go, gan, Old English. A reason, they'd get up. Okay. They'd drink and they'd etan, so they'd drink and they'd eat. Basic family relationships, parts of the body, eye, ear, mouth, and nothing fancy like appendix, because that's not tonsils, that's not going to have existed in Old English. Okay, well if I read you a very short snippet of an Old English poem, 10th century, it's called The Dream of the Rood, and this is just a couple of lines of it, which I thought exemplify or show how similar Old English is to modern English.
Let's see if I can understand that.
Do. So, thuchte me that each sour silitra trail.
The first 2 words, I think, can't be said on Discovery Channel.
Right, okay. Make him move.
The first words. Foxed me.
It turns out thuchte me actually means thought me, or I thought, not
but with the old
the other one.
Letter.
But generally, Old English and Modern English have a lot in common.
But I do get the sense that if I said me and my wife man here on horse, and we will eat in the house and then swim in the night and day and with the king, that kind of stuff is pretty similar between Old English and Modern English. Whereas if I say I was texting in my car with the astrophysics professor who brought me a ham sandwich from the shops, and that all goes wrong. So it's all good.
In fact, they're so similar that with just a brief lesson, I can have a conversation in Old English. And not just with other English people. As it's a Germanic language, I should be able to use it to communicate with people who speak other Germanic languages.
Logically, if I learn some phrases from you, work out some lines, put them together, in Old English, I should be able to go to a land which still is using a Germanic language and have a vague conversation. And I would go to a farm and try and buy a cow or something like that.
What kind of cow do you want? Do you want
a real Rolls Royce of a cow, you know, real sort of all the adders in working order?
The first thing you have to say is I would like to buy. Old English, willan is want or I desire.
Really?
Okay.
Because
the bujan, the origin of the word to buy. Okay, so.
Bujan, Anna, Bruna, Ku.
So if you want to buy a cow that
is full of meaty milk.
Well, that makes milk.
That makes milk.
That makes milk. Macath.
Maca.
Mailche.
Mailche.
Milk. Mailche.
Mailche.
Yeah. And if you need to get his attention, you just shout at him either "what," meaning listen, low, or
What?
"ela, ela."
Yeah. Mate.
Yeah.
Accent-wise, of course, it's very. I know it's impossible to really tell what they sound like.
There's no point looking at modern English accents to give us a clue to Old English because it's a Germanic language. It's more likely, certainly in its earliest kind of days, to sound Dutch-ish.
But I think I've watched Dutch people on MTV who go, "It's fantastic, and now this new band, it's crazy new band coming on here in Amsterdam. It's fantastic," and I'm going to go for that kind of accent, which I picked up when I was watching MTV in Holland. This is Friesland in northern Holland. It's where some of the Anglo-Saxon tribes originally come from. The language they speak here is called Frisian. It's a Germanic language which is very similar to Old English, which makes Friesland the ideal place to try and buy a cow. Ik wil boeken een bruin koe. Dat maakt mietsen miltje. Ik wil boeken een little boeten strang koe. But this koe is not a little brown koe, it's a big green koe made out of metal, so I don't think I really want to buy that. Oi! Hi! So in theory, I should be able to speak to a farmer in Old English. He should be able to reply to me in Frisian, and we should be able to understand one another. Hello. Hallo, ik spreek Old English. Understandest thou me?
Ja.
Ja?
Maar dat versteer ik niet. Nee. Nee.
Nee.
Ik ben een Fries.
Ja, Fries. Old English. Ik wil boeken een bruine koe.
Een bruine koe?
Een bruine koe.
Een bruine koe, ja.
Een bruine koe. Ik wil boeken.
In Boetisch?
Boetisch?
Boetisch.
Bruine koe, ja. Dat maakt miltje.
Ja, je wil hem melken.
Melken.
Ja. Je wil die bruine koe in Engeland melken.
Engeland melken?
Ja, in Engeland melken.
Oké.
Ja. Van de cheese en van de boter.
Van de cheese,
ja.
Cheese en de boter. Ja, cheese is Old English.
Ja.
Cheese is goed. En die broenkoe, nou, zie die broenkoe?
Ja, wij gaan naar de bruine koe.
Oké.
Ja.
Dank u wel. So just using Old English, I've got myself a cow. Now to sort out payment and delivery. This is Friesland in northern Holland, where they speak Frisian. I'm buying a cow here, speaking only Old English, which is the basis of modern English, and the language brought to us by the Anglo-Saxons more than 1,000 years ago.
Dat is een hoe. Dit is een border collie.
Border collie?
Border collie.
Border collie in Fria?
Een border collie, dat is Engels.
Ah, dat is Engels, ja. Because we got border collie, yeah.
Dat is import.
Import. This is an import. I thought that's very close. The bruine koe, see, yeah. Now we've talked about cows, now we talk about figures.
Nee, zeg.
What?
Hondengoenen.
Oh, what, the money? Of euros.
Hasje, manasje.
100 euros.
Ja.
Yeah, it's modern.
Het komt hier naar uit. Ja.
It's English money.
Ja, nee, dat is geld.
Geld. Gold.
Ja, koe.
The koe, yeah. Which koe? Een grijze broek. Yeah, they're very good. Baby koe.
Ah, die Lietse.
Is het Lietse?
Ja, dat is Lietse.
Is this little koe?
Dit wordt een echte bruine koe.
Once you get your ear in, you can really hear similarities between English and this Germanic dialect.
Wil ik wat drinken?
Okay. Wow. Molke? Molke.
Ja.
Ja.
Van de bruine kool.
Voor de bruine koe. Ja.
Ja.
The dong is for the fields?
Ja, van het veld.
Fields.
Van lange.
Field?
Ja,
Wat say field?
Field. Dit is het veld.
That is fair?
Dat is field.
And that is what? That is a hen in there?
Ja, dat ben ik. Hen. Zie je die kraai? Dat is hen.
A hen is the same.
Ja, ja.
Twee hen in the field.
Ja.
Een pair hen in the field.
Ja, een peer hen.
A pair hen.
Een peer hen. Ja.
I've only just scratched the surface here, but you can see what happened in a couple of hours with Jacob was certain words just leap out at you. Because the Frisian people came over to England 1,500 years ago, but there's certain words that are just right bang the same. A pair of hens in the field. I want a brown cow now in the field, matey boy. So we can see that the basis of this language was what has become our language.
Over the centuries, English has adapted and changed. It's absorbed and created thousands of new words and is now spoken by more than 500 million people across the world. It's possibly our greatest export. But we shouldn't forget that thanks to the Anglo-Saxons, we're all really speaking a kind of German.
Whoa, boy.
The Anglo-Saxons also gave us something else that defines us even more than our language. The idea of England itself as a country. In the 9th century, England wasn't one country. It was fragmented into small independent kingdoms. The biggest and most dominant were Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia and Wessex. The process that unites the kingdoms into one was started by King Alfred of Wessex. He joined the kingdoms together, appealing to their common language, law and customs. But what gave Alfred the impetus and opportunity to unify the kingdoms was that they were all under threat from a new group of invaders who were attacking the country. These invaders came from Scandinavia, and we called them the Vikings.
Raiders from Norway and Denmark came across here and attacked all down the east coast and some even as far as the west coast. Sometimes they took what they wanted and went away. Later on they took what they wanted and stayed.
We call them Vikings, but they didn't call themselves Vikings, because that's just a rude word for pirates. Attracted by the wealth of England and pushed out by the harsh conditions of their homelands, they came over in droves. And though some of them were just in it for the gold and glory, many of them were settlers looking for somewhere else to live. They came over in such numbers that initially Alfred was forced to make a deal with them.
In the end, Alfred and the Vikings signed a treaty, the Treaty of Wedmore, and they agreed to divide up the country. Quite simply, they drew a line. If you lived on one side, you lived in England. If you lived on the other side, you lived in an area known as Danelaw. The line went from here up to here.
It cut the country in two. The English had the south and the Vikings had the north. It was the start of something that shapes England's character today, the north-south divide. And the Vikings didn't just start it, they still influence it. There are differences on either side of the line that can be traced back to the differences between Vikings and Anglo-Saxons. The most obvious is place names. North of the Danelaw line, places have Viking names. They end in words like Thwaite, meaning meadow, By, meaning farm, and Thorpe, meaning village. Down south, the names are Anglo-Saxon. Anything with Bury, meaning fort, Ham, meaning village, and Bourne, meaning stream. But their legacy goes deeper than just words.
The Viking domination of the north was so complete that today, 1,000 years after they first arrived, the people from the area that used to be the Danelaw have a different genetic makeup to those who came from outside it. And this can be traced directly back to the Vikings and identified in your DNA. Best way to find DNA is take a very small toilet brush like this and hard it on your backyard. Get some cells on it, and then you send it off to the lab.
The lab will analyze my Y chromosome. one of the 46 chromosomes that make up the genetic blueprint that determines who we are. Women don't have Y chromosomes, only men do, so they're inherited directly down the male line from father to son. They hardly change from one generation to another. My Y chromosome looks just like my dad's, and that looks like his dad's, and his dad's, and his dad's. And from it, I'll find out if I have Viking ancestors. Unlikely, because I'm not from the north. The area that was the Danelaw. You're the prof who knows about these, checking these DNA babies all the way back. And I know about the Y chromosome. I heard about this, which was the logic that men have XY and women have XX. Transvestites, God knows what's going on. But up the Y channel, up me and my dad and going up there, there's a logic that the Y chromosome gets passed down.
Yeah. We take the fingerprint from your Y chromosome and we compare it, if we're trying to see whether you're a Viking or a Celt or a Saxon or something like that. We compare it with people from Norway, in the case of Vikings, see if it matches up with them.
Right.
From other parts of Europe.
Have I passed?
Have you passed the Viking test?
The Viking test, yes.
Have you passed the Viking test? There's a whole load of numbers there, and those we can compare. I mean, you could almost read that right across like as a credit card number.
I could plug that one in a lottery and see if I could win.
Actually, it's not bad. Yeah.
I'll read a match now.
Yeah, right.
16.
Like a 16 is different.
These numbers represent the makeup of my Y chromosome.
It's number 11.
If I match someone we think is descended from a Norse or Danish Viking, then the chances are that I'm descended from one too.
12. Yeah, we're looking at about 12,000 different people. And you, that little tinkle tells me that you don't match any of them.
Can I phone a friend?
Since I don't match anyone exactly, Brian compares me with people who are similar. From looking at my Y chromosome, it becomes clear I'm not a Viking.
It's likely from this analysis to have come from maybe the near continent. It could have come over to England with the Saxons or with some other movement, but its distribution within the southern part of England rather than Scotland, North and Shetland and so on suggests not really a Viking Y chromosome.
It's not surprising I don't have a Viking Y chromosome because my family comes from the south of England. Brian's research shows that twice as many northerners as southerners are probably descended from Norse Vikings. Therefore, I'd be much more likely to have a Viking Y chromosome if I came from the north, the area that was once inside the Danelaw. To test the theory, we took a random sample of northerners and southerners. They're all here today to watch Chelsea play Blackburn Rovers in a Premiership football match. Half of them are Chelsea fans, half of them are Blackburn fans. On the outside, they look much the same. They look like football fans. But on the inside, they're probably a bit different, because in the 9th century, Chelsea was in the south, in England, and Blackburn was in the north, in the Danelaw. This means that twice as many Blackburn fans should be descended from Vikings as Chelsea ones. To find out, all we have to do is take their DNA and send it off to the lab. But the Viking legacy isn't just in the blood. It's also argued that Viking culture has left a strong mark on the North, and that differences in attitudes which exist today between the North and the South can be traced directly back to the Vikings. We discovered what people thought were the 3 biggest differences between Northerners and Southerners, and then asked if there was any historical basis for these perceived differences. Difference number 1.
People from the north can be a bit more aggressive.
Northerners are a bit less namby-pamby than southerners.
They're a bit harsher than we are down south.
Just as Northerners are considered tough, so were the Vikings. One group had a particularly fierce reputation.
Berserkers were a subgroup of Vikings who are quite well documented. These were Vikings who allegedly could bite through their shields, they could run at the enemy, and they could destroy a shield wall, seemingly impervious to pain.
Difference number 2.
They can be friendlier up north. The northerners probably a bit more friendly, a bit more open with people. Whereas the southerners a bit more reserved, I suppose.
There is this preconception that the Vikings were just barbarians, they were godless, therefore they were lawless. But in fact they had a very well-structured society, perhaps based on the ship, which could take them all around the world, and a good crew being forged together would ultimately forged together all the farms that these warriors had come from and ultimately the area that they came from.
Difference number 3.
Up north we like to spend money on nice designer clothes.
Ladies from the north from 16 to 60 dress exactly the same. Short skirts, and no matter what the weather is, low-cut tops, which is nice.
The Vikings could take the time and trouble to show themselves off. They would. They even invented false things to show themselves off, such as ladies who were given keys made of leather. These keys could not have opened any locks, but from a distance, the lady would look quite rich.
So the legacy of Viking culture lives on in the North-South divide. For our DNA sample to fit with the national averages, it should show that twice as many Blackburn fans as Chelsea ones have Viking genes. And when our results came back from the lab, Chelsea has 1 Viking, Blackburn 2. Although the Vikings held the north, they couldn't take over the south. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the Vikings and the newly united English fought back and forth across the country. Then in 1066, the 4th and final band of invaders arrived in England. It was the Normans, from northern France, led by William, Duke of Normandy, also known as Guillaume the Bastard. Guillaume killed King Harold and defeated the English at the Battle of Hastings. The Normans took over the whole of England. Guillaume became William the Conqueror, and he meant business.
What the Normans were was very effective corporate raiders who knew how to take over ongoing concerns and make them yield even more than they had before.
William wanted England because it was rich. It could make him and his companions rich too. The way to make money out of it was to take it over, divide it up, and tax it. But to tax something efficiently, you need to know what it's worth. To put a price on what he'd conquered, William ordered a countrywide survey. It was known as Doomsday, and it marked a huge change in the way England was governed. Our modern government is its direct descendant. Yes, it was the Normans who gave us a love of form-filling and petty bureaucracy. So King William the Bastard, he's come and conquered the whole of England, which is great because I am Guy to a place nearby where William from, and I come in and I was helping him with his bags and everything, so I'm gonna get a bit of England for me, which is wonderful. So I'm coming around here and I'm gonna ask them how much they got. Want any pigs and hens and stuff? But the thing is, I don't speak no English, so I get my man here, he gonna ask them, because it's all mine, I wanna know what I got. Okay, in an aggressive way. Frappe la porte.
How many hens do you own?
I think I have 2 in the freezer.
How many bovates of land do you have? Do you have any ploughs?
So my day in 1066, we asked these questions. How many ploughs you got? How many chickens you got? But in your day, we would ask questions much more like this.
How many tellies are there in your house? What's your car worth?
I'd have to consult my accountant about that.
Okay.
And
well,
he's in Steyr at the moment.
How much do you earn a year?
So if we ask you these questions today, what do you have in your house? You have this here, you have that there, how much you earn? You wouldn't want to tell anyone. But the Normans, they got the English to tell them because they said, if you do not tell us, we will not write it down in this book and then it will not exist. You will not own it legally. This is the legal document, the Doomsday Book. The Doomsday Book is the result of this near nationwide survey. It's really 2 books, Greater and Little Doomsday, that list in detail what almost every manor in England is worth. Its attention to detail is staggering. Edmund holds matching, which Elmer Holdfast held before him. It's 1.5 hides and a manor. There were then 2 ploughs in domain, now 1. The men then had 3.5 ploughs, now 3. Then 7 villeins, now 9. There were 7 cows, 1 pig, 100 sheep. Then, as now, it was worth 100 shillings.
There is nothing like it not only in England, there's nothing like it on the continent.
There is nothing like Doomsday Book anywhere else in the world.
It is something which in post-conquest England is absolutely unrivaled.
Doomsday wasn't just a unique document. It was the start of something much bigger. the English obsession with filling in forms. From the 11th century onwards, the government started issuing, copying and keeping records like never before. It became the way to do official business.
This is a period of change from an essentially oral culture to one that is far more dependent upon the written word. The written word is seen as possessing a much greater authority.
This change from oral memory to written records swept across Europe, and in England it all started with Doomsday.
It's the earliest record we have made by the government and kept by the government since that day till this.
It is arguably the first of our public records.
Today there are more than 9.5 million documents in the Public Record Office on shelves that stretch for nearly 100 miles. So next time you have to fill in something in triplicate, blame the Normans. But record keeping isn't the only thing you can blame the Normans for. When the Normans conquered England in 1066, a tiny force of only 6,000 invaders took over a country of nearly 2 million people. They did it by getting rid of all the people who had been in power and just taking their places. The French Norman invaders became the new lords of all England, and the old Anglo-Saxon lords were killed, exiled and suppressed. The social structure radically changed and became a very pointy, pyramid-y shape with a lot of Anglo-Saxons at the bottom, not the good part to be, and the Normans sitting on the top. Ooh yes, much more fun.
One other feature of the conquest is that a huge amount of land is concentrated in the hands of a comparatively small sample.
There are now about 180 super landlords, themselves the men of the king, and lording it, literally, over the Englishmen who are now subordinate to them.
These lords are the Normans' most enduring legacy, because the Normans gave us our aristocracy, and with it, the basis of our class system. The aristocracy might seem quintessentially English, but even the word is French. Amazingly, the aristocracy wasn't just French in the 1100s. It's French now. Nearly 1,000 years after the conquest, almost a fifth of England's aristocracy claimed Norman ancestry. The land, the power and the titles are still in the hands of their descendants.
I'm David Charles Robert, 11th Duke of Rutland. I'm also the 16th Earl of Rutland, and I'm also Lord Roos of Hamlack and Trusput, and I do have a number, and I can't remember what number I am for that. Well, we've got an estate called Haddon Hall, near Bakewell in Derbyshire.
Mm-hmm. And how much land is there?
About 6,500 acres there.
Right.
And then we have in between 14 and 15,000 acres here.
Enough to be getting on with.
In return for huge tracts of land, the Norman lords had to give service to William and help him keep control and raise revenues in England.
We were sent up to deepest, darkest of what is now Northumberland, to Etal. If there was a war to be fought somewhere, maybe in France, or maybe squashing some rebellion locally, we were expected to supply troops to the king, and also to a certain extent to collect taxes and pass them on to the royal coffers.
Many Normans married into English families and began to see themselves as English, but though they changed their nationality, they hung on to their status.
If I said you were part of the Norman aristocracy, does that sound a bit odd?
Different. I wouldn't say odd.
Because people don't really refer to themselves that way now.
No, you're just the aristocracy. Where you originated from doesn't really crop up in conversation.
So you'd be English aristocracy now as opposed to...
Yes, well, just aristocracy.
Just aristocracy.
Norman heritage remains something people are proud of. Strange when you remember just how and why they came to England to steal everything.
And you have a coat of arms with, quite often they have a Latin...
Indeed, but ours is French.
Yours is French.
Our motto is French.
And what is your motto?
Puis parvenir, which means to obtain your object.
To obtain your object. Good slice of England.
Aristocrats aren't just people with bigger houses than us, though they are that too. They continued the tradition that started with the Normans of owning vast swathes of England. More than any other social group, they shaped our values and guided our politics. Even in the 21st century, some hereditary peers still have the right to sit in the House of Lords and vote on our legislation, all because of their ancestors.
Although England hasn't been invaded since 1066, modern England and the English are to a large extent the descendants of those foreigners who invaded this land all those years ago. Our currency and our place names, what we eat and our class system, our language and our genetic makeup, all of these are from foreign influences. None of these are homegrown. Take the Palace of Westminster, the mother of all parliaments and one of England's great historical achievements. It is a mongrel creation. First, the Italian Romans gave us the very idea of government. Then the German Angles and Saxons and the Norwegian and Danish Vikings gave us the assemblies from which our parliament grew. Then in the 11th century, the French Normans gave us the administrative infrastructure, which is the basis for modern Whitehall. We should be proud to be English because we are so cosmopolitan. It is the mongrel dog that's really wily and clever, and he steals all your biscuits and sells them to the local kids. It is the pedigree dog that's kind of pretty but thick as two short planks and chokes on the biscuit and dies. So let's all sit up and be proud to be a Mongrel Nation.
And there'll be more from Mr. Izzard at the same time next Wednesday night. And stay with us for another Discovery Channel premiere next, when we uncover the real Rasputin.